Check it out. Check it out. Yes, sir. We're going to be talking about some interesting things today. Yep. Going to get into some interesting things today. Peace, y'all. Bargani, Islam, Salam, Hitep, Hetepu, Rahubat, Chino Lako Ni Nani Chief Noble Bandele Elamine, back again for another video today. Today's video, we are going to be dealing with hoodoo. Okay, I don't know if y'all know what hoodoo is, but we're going to be dealing with hoodoo because we understand that we are supposed to go back to the creed of our ancient forefathers and foremothers. As the Moorish creed, as Noble Drew Ali says, that we shall go back to the creed, ancient creed of our forefathers and foremothers. So he's talking about our ancestors. So we're going to get into the religion of our ancestors and the original, one of the original African American religious forms. Okay. So before we get into that, please like the video, subscribe. Please go and check out any of the books that I have on Amazon. You can go under Bandele Elamine, find any of my books on Amazon, and also check out indigenousservices.webs.com. Okay. So without further ado, let us get into the nook of the cranny of this. Now, why did I even pick hoodoo, man? Because I don't know, for the past, I don't know, it's been a while, last 2-3 years, hoodoo has become more and more of an interest to me. And based on my own lifestyle and practice, a lot of hoodoo has been incorporated into my life without me even knowing that it was hoodoo, okay? Being that I've been into like different sciences, I've studied with the Moorish science, I've studied with Osir, Assess Society, and I've studied with various people. For me, it was an understanding of me going back to an indigenous or what we call African, Pan Africanist perspective on life before colonialization, before slavery. Okay, to bring that connection back to us, because we knew it was more than Christianity being brought to us in America. Okay, a lot of us, like they say, Plymouth Rock landed on us. Well, I mean, when that happened, the religious practice of the country of America, which was predominantly a Protestant religious of Christianity, that was the dominant force in America around the time of slavery. And so what we're always taught in our tradition, what they teach us in Black history, they always teach us that we was practicing some old voodoo, and then the good old, Albion come and give us Christianity. I even hear Christians saying that, well, if it wasn't for slavery, we wouldn't be saved. And I mean, I think that's just crazy, but the point is, we are taught through history that we are Christian in this country. And we're always taught about the Christian churches, the African Methodist Church, and the first churches of Blacks. Very rarely are we taught about the African traditions that were brought over here. And there is a reason why that's done. Okay. First, we understand that the European ain't never liked voodoo or anything magic. Okay. First of all, one of the reasons why is because they had been brainwashed in Europe first. Europe had already got rid of what all they call witches. And we understand that witches in Europe back in the times of the witch trials, Anybody who was going against Christianity, anybody who practiced herbalism or practiced anything that was metaphysical or outside of Orthodox Catholicism was going to be killed or punished in some form or fashion. I mean, we got the Inquisitions and all these things, okay? All the witch trials, all the witch hunts, all the women, all the witches being burned to the stake. That's dealing with magic. Christianity could not compete with magic. So they eliminated. This tradition is brought here into the Americas. When we come to the Americas, we got the witch trials going on, the Salem witch trials. So you have this same religious group of people in somewhat fashion leaving Europe, but coming over here doing much of the same thing. And I think because of that, those group of people who are the custodian of history in America. Okay. Hey, anybody in the building, let me know if I sound okay. Like if my voice is staticky or anything, okay? But coming over here in America, bringing that same mentality, and because those people are the ones who today, as a Christian nation, we don't want to talk about the other religions that are here in America. We don't want to look at one of the main religions in the United States, predominantly, okay? Hoodoo is a religion of Africans and indigenous people in America. So it's a distinct religion. Okay. So we're gonna go into hoodoo. Okay, we're gonna look at what hoodoo is. Hoodoo is the African American system of practice, of spiritual practice, based in the curative and protective power of roots, herbs, and other natural materials, also known as folk religion. So this is telling you in itself that hoodoo is an African American system. So what that means is it was something that was developed in the Americas. Okay? This was a religious system developed in the Americas. So it is distinct to American history. To me, this shows that there was African an African system that had developed in the Americas that was not necessarily Christian. Okay. Um, okay, so you look at Hoodoo Conjure is distinct from voodoo. Now I want to talk about that because when we get to talking about hoodoo, a lot of people have the misconception that hoodoo and voodoo is the same just because it rhymes, or they think that it's some kind of there is a connection to hoodoo and voodoo, but they are not the same. And so what this is saying is that it's a distinct from voodoo in that it is a religious system of beliefs that manifests itself in the manipulation of spiritual forces to do one's bidding, both bad and good in the physical. So hoodoo is something that you use to conjure powers, okay? Magic, if you will. This magic it's a manipulation of spiritual forces. So it appears to be magic. So it's the ability to manipulate the spiritual forces to do work in the physical. And it's something that you're supposed to see, I want to say fairly fast, or something that you'll see, that'll happen in the physical, like apparent. It's an apparent thing. It's something that you will see in the physical. So they're manifesting stuff in the spiritual realm to bring in the physical realm. That is basically what hoodoo does. Now, what they say about voodoo, voodoo, on the other hand, is a religion that worships a superior god, as well as pantheon deities, or called orishas, through veneration and respect. So, voodoo has gods, where hoodoo, you're not necessarily using, uh, it's not coming from the superior god. You're not worshiping the superior god. Hoodoo is like this, the manipulation of spiritual forces. Voodoo is a religious worship of spiritual forces, okay, or the veneration and respect, particularly of the past deceased. So you're talking about ancestors and whatnot. So when you get to hearing about ancestor worship or this and that, that tends to be done particularly in voodoo and not hoodoo. Hoodoo, I think hoodoo was important in American slavery because it was used to manifest things to help protect you against a lot of the atrocities that were being done in America. So, hoodoo takes from both of its powers from what they see here in America, which is Christianity, and what their past ancestors used, which was forms of voodoo. So they take these two systems, if you will, and then they created a spiritual manipulation. And I don't want you to get this confused with how you got Santeria in the Americas, where Santeria is like Yoruba and Catholic traditions combined. That's still like a voodoo. But hoodoo ain't like that. Hoodoo is like using spiritual forces to conjure spells, to conjure what they call root work. Okay. These things were more of an immediate response to what was going on in the Americas. Predominantly, like we're talking about slavery and the fact that these melanated black African indigenous people were subjected to such things. They needed some kind of protection. So what you'll find in hoodoo is a lot of protection spells and a lot of things to strike out against something. Okay. So um like I said, hoodoo is an American religion. It was created by Africans and indigenous people. Okay. What I'm saying, like we're saying, you take in, like, you got indigenous culture, which is the herbs, the magic that was in indigenous America, comes together with the African spiritual systems of animist and using conjuring. Those two forces come together, and then they use the tools that they have at their disposal. One of the most powerful tools that they had, that melanated people had at their disposal, was the Bible. And so you'll find a lot of people who practice hoodoo use the Bible to cast spells. So, a lot of people look at that like as sacrilegious, but because hoodoo was not Christian, it only used Christian spiritual forces to manipulate to do what they needed to do. Okay. So one of the things that we talk about with hoodoo is that hoodoo has its base in African and indigenous culture. This is without a doubt, hoodoo is our culture. This is one of our most powerful spiritual practices. So here, this is a quote from Madame Omi Kongo. It says that without an African ancestral, okay, ancestral is always, the ancestors are always important to melanated people. Without this African or ancestral link, the practice becomes something other than hoodoo. Okay. And this is from Madame Omi Kongo, and they call themselves root workers. These are the spiritual people who practice. They're called root workers. When I heard this, and when I first started hearing about root work, first thing that came to my mind was what was it? In Harlem Nights. Harlem Nights, when Red Fox was talking to Quick, or Eddie Murphy's character, and he was talking about the Creole girl. And he said, you mess around with them Creole women, and they're going to put a root on you. Okay. And to hear him say it like that, that just sounds so hoodoo. It sounds so hoodoo-ish. And the thing about it was, this was back in like the 1930s or whatever. So I find that a lot of root work was still being done in certain parts of the United States, predominantly like in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, just places in the South. You'll find that a lot of hoodoo is practiced down in the South. And no coincidence, that's where you find most of your slavery. So it's important for us to understand this because, like I said, this is a part of our religious history in America that a lot of times gets wiped out. We don't talk about it. We always think that we're purely Christian, that we didn't have anything to do with anything but Christianity, and that if anything that we did was so long ago, that was African. Not realizing that African spirituality had been converted into an Americanized version. I'll give you a story. My parents are originally from Mississippi. I have a great grandmother who would use putting a penny copper on their leg and putting cayenne pepper in their shoe. Using certain salt. Very superstitious. A lot of my people from the South are considered superstitious. What I'm finding out is that what we call superstitious really stems from an actual practice of hoodoo. Okay. But to try to downplay hoodoo and downplay African traditional spirituality in America, they called it superstitious. Okay. So I just want you to see the connection and how they try to hide things from us and right in our face. Okay. So now to go further in, we say many of the practices of hoodoo are similar to other diaspora tradition, as the practices come from the Bakongo people in Central Africa. So once again, it's showing you the connection of hoodoo to African people or more traditional African spirituality. So we say they're talking about Bakongo people, right? So who's Bakongo people? All right, let's look into that. Let's look into Bakongo. What is the meaning of Bakongo? Bakongo, you can almost tell what it is because you can tell by the word that it's a member of people living in West Central Africa along the lower Congo River. Okay. So, when we understand our history as well. Now, there's a lot of controversy going on about, everybody coming from Americas and all the so-called melanated people that are here in Americas were already here. Now, I do dispute that claim. However, I am not here to say that there weren't a lot of indigenous people already here. That is also part of this story. The indigenous people in the Americas were already practicing these form of spirituality. Okay, they had a deep connection to the planet. They had animist uh, spirituality in the Americas. So these things that we're talking about are not just African, okay? But what it's showing you is there is a connection to Africa in the Americas, okay? And you can see a lot of that in the spirituality as well, because one of the things they say is that a lot of the Africans that were brought over here, along with the indigenous that were here already, a lot of the Africans that were brought here in this part of the Americas were coming from West and Central Africa. Now we know, and I'm not going to go off on a tangent, but we know that there were slaves that were traded in Africa, all around Africa. In South Africa, everywhere. Okay, different. You had different countries doing different slave trading. So the British slave trade was predominantly in the West African area. Okay, and it shows that. So now the other part of this, it says that the Bantu language of them also, it says of Bakongo and used by the Congo people. So the Bakongo is also the language, a Bantu language. Now Bantu people, we know Bantu languages is the key African, especially sub-Saharan, if you want to use that term. It's predominantly, definitely a sub-Saharan language. Bantu people, Kiswahili, all that stuff come out of Bantu. But Bantu is a very common, and it is a root language for a vast amount of African territories. Okay, so when they talk about the practices of hoodoo come from the Bakongo people, they are letting you know that hoodoo's roots have a very strong African influence on it. Okay, so a lot of the so-called slaves or people that were indentured that were in the South and among other places, in order for them to protect themselves, they used hoodoo. Now, I think that hoodoo played a pivotal part in how an Albion so-called white person would have dealt with you. For one, like we said, being that white people were predominantly connected to a Protestant Christianity in America, any kind of hoodoo would have been looked at as satanic and would have been, they would have been scared, feared it, and they would have tried to stomp it out. But one of the first tactics is they would have been fearful of it. So a lot of times they would have left you alone if they seen you or thought you was doing that. Now, one thing I want you to understand too is that, because it was hoodoo and it was looked at maybe as satanic by Europeans, the Anglo-Saxons here, that a lot of them had to do it underground, if you will. Okay. And that's what has not been revealed, because it was underground and it had to be kept quiet. A lot of us we lost a lot of history about who used hoodoo. A lot more people practice hoodoo than we probably understand. Okay. Because it was more of a practical religion to be used more than it was Christianity. But they had to do this in the low. And I'm gonna show you that, because I think like the next day. So okay, for example, I'm gonna show you how Christianity would have played a part of hiding or concealing our true religious creed. Okay, Christianity was used to hide our true religious creed. Okay, and let's look at this. So in Savannah, Georgia, one of the first African American churches. It was called the First African Baptist Church. Okay. Now, listen to this. There was the Congo cosmogram. Okay. So what they're saying right there is that in this church, they found a Congo. We just talked about the Bakongo. We just talked about how Hoodoo is linked to the Congo or Bakongo. And so we got in this first African church the Congo cosmogram symbol. Say it was found in the basement of the church, and it was used for prayer and what? Meditation. Okay, now why is this so significant? Because we tend to think that meditation is something that was introduced to us in the past, 50 years. Okay, granted. Okay, a lot of churches today still haven't gravitated toward meditation, but there are a lot of churches today that are coming onto meditation. Okay, with the event of New Age movement as well, kind of having an influence on things. But look at what I'm reading to you. This church in Savannah, Georgia, had in the basement a Congo symbol used for prayer and meditation. So this church goes back 1700s, late 1700s, right? Uh, so back before any of this, before we was thinking about any of this today, our ancestors, our recent ancestors, were using prayer and meditation. Where? In the basement. Why were they in the basement? Because once again, they were smart enough to conceal the true intent of what they're doing spiritually. You had to do things in secret. Something that I think that we have gotten away from as a people today. We don't move in secrecy as if we think that we can do things in the public without being punished or addressed. But things are different now. So things are not up in front of you. It's more covert. So I think that sometimes we think that we're safe to come out and speak on things instead of being secret. If you understand what was read here, these people had on the front was the church, but in the basement was where the real spiritual work was being done. And that spiritual work was not Christian work per se. It was African spirituality, indigenous spirituality in the form of hoodoo. Okay. Hoodoo Hoodoo was dominant in the slave states. We talked about this. Hoodoo is very prevalent in the slave states because, like we've said, that's where it was most needed. That's where the greatest work had to be done because you were fighting against, like, hoodoo was basically used to fight against what we call white power. Okay. Um, Hoodoo was used into combat this whole white system. Okay, it was used to combat slavery. And so this is why it got stomped out. When you do some more history on hoodoo, that you see that it was strong in the 1800s. And it kind of started to die out a little bit in the late 1800s. And then it kind of had a surge in the 1920s and 30s. And then it kind of just fell off. And, as a people, I mean, 10, 20 years go by and we've forgotten our history. And so a lot of the hoodoo has been, kind of put into Hollywood. Has anybody ever seen the skeleton key? I'm gonna tell you, the skeleton key was the first movie that I actually began to really look at hoodoo. Now, I'm not going to spoil the movie if you haven't seen it, but the movie, The Skeleton Key, is based totally around a hoodoo spiritualist who was popular back in the 20s and 30s. So I say that to say that, hoodoo was popular all the way up until the 1900s. And for other reasons or another, it got pushed down. You had other groups coming up at the time, like Nation Islam. Islam became more dominant, and Christianity kind of stomped things out, but not totally, right? Because people are starting to practice hoodoo again. Now, the reason why, like I said, the reason why hoodoo is so deep is because you could practice hoodoo as an individual, and there was no priest that you had to go to or any like organized religious force. All you had to do is use what they, use stuff, use the herbs. One of the major things that was incorporated was the indigenous herbs of America. They started to use herbs that they found, and they found these herbs to be useful, useful in their practice. So this is why hoodoo, you guys really must look at hoodoo and understand that it's really the American religion for melanated people, regardless if you want to or not. Even as a Christian, that there's hoodoo in our early Christian history. And that what I learned in school is that when the first so-called Africans came over here and were enslaved, for the first 20 or 30 years, the European kind of let them practice their religion they would go out in the forest somewhere, or they would go a little bit away, a distance from the plantation, and they would actually practice their traditions. But after the Haitian Revolution, and if anybody understands the Haitian Revolution, they realized that the Haitians who revolted had said that they give back Christianity to the master, their slave master. They did not want to use Christianity to overthrow or to use it to revolt against their oppressor. Very good reason why. One of the things that I always learn as the master elder, Ashwa Kwesi, would often say was that your deity is your enemy, all right? Or the enemy is the deity. So what happens, or what has always seemed to happen, is that as melanated people wanted to revolt, but they held on to their Christian beliefs, were not really able to fully revolt against the master, because hidden deep in the Christian doctrine is a form of servitude to your master. And that part of Christianity is what was being taught to the African slaves, or the Africans in general. The churches that were set up were always set up where there was some kind of slave master that was allowed to sit in on the church service. Okay. And that was his ability, use that ability to control what was being said in the church. So, like I said, our ancestors, our recent ancestors, Ashe, were smart enough to encode the African spiritual practice. They were able to encode the traditions and the ways of our forefathers and foremothers, and code it into Christian, like rap it in the Christian rap, So the core was still African tradition. Okay, this is what For in particular, this is one of the things that I think um, we have lost in the black church today, is that the black church has lost its roots. The African traditions and the indigenous people have lost their root spiritual work and gave it up for just Christianity itself. Okay. And so today, when you go to church, you don't see that. I mean, think about it, y'all. When you go to church, they don't even burn incense. Like, I always say this, but when you go to a Catholic church for certain practices, they burn frankincense and myrrh. But in any of the black churches, it's almost sacrilegious to burn incense. It's sacrilegious to use herbs in a form of manipulating the spirits. So I feel like a lot of the core spiritual essence of the church has kind of dwindled down into just a dogmatic practice of Christian doctrine. And you see a lot of failing with the church now. Now I'm just saying, I'm just making a correlation because I mean, even when you look at the church in the 60s and the 50s, had a strong root, had a strong following, but you could tell that these people were determined and strong. Now, and you know, we look back at them and we're like, oh, you know, there was some Christians singing, but we're not realizing that, like I said, our ancestors would encode spiritual practices, African techniques in the Christian church. They would hide them only because they had to hide them. So, if you want to look at it, hoodoo is sort of like it was a secret society. To practice hoodoo was a secret society. The what I think makes it different than what you know as regular secret societies is that it wasn't organized. Okay, Santeria is an organized religion of voodoo that was secret in the Catholic Church. To me, that's a secret society. These were our secret societies, if you will. So, you know, even today, you know, practicing these things have to be done in secret because, you know, people are still not ready for hoodoo. The majority of melanated people in America are still not ready for hoodoo. Okay. Except that's why hoodoo has separated itself from the church. You won't find people practicing hoodoo in the church anymore. They had to go underground and practice it underground. But because of today, because of modern times, because of the new age movement, because we're moving into a new age, hoodoo is becoming more acceptable again. Hoodoo is becoming much more of an acceptable way of life. Okay, y'all, please like the video. If y'all in the building, like the video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel if you will. Let's keep and please donate. You know, feel free to donate. Um, feel free to donate under Bandele 227 under Cash App. Um, Super chat, like the video, super like the video. Um, my purpose is really to just use that money to build more equipment so that we can build a true podcast. You know, so we can have, you know, get the technology better, get the visuals better, you know, all these things. because I'm using, like, of course, lower grade stuff to try to bring these video and information. But I feel like me bringing it, if I'm allowed to bring it with clearer and more concise things to track people, that the message will get out there more. Okay, so, but I appreciate everybody in here. Um, this is pretty much where I was going with the video today. Like I said, man, y'all just take heed. Please study our African history. Please study the spirituality systems. Don't get caught up in just one particular religious value. Look at what we were doing before and in slavery. While we were enslaved, we were practicing um, African spirituality. Okay, we were using African spirituality to fight against the oppressor. Okay, I just want y'all to understand that. Like, when we look at what was the what's the African revolutionists in Haiti? When we look at Bookman, when we look at Bookman, and what he says to us, he said, "Give back what the master, your slave master, his religion." They took on the war god Ogun. They took on that as um, their symbol to go to war. Okay, they we often look at Haiti as like the main people that use African spirituality against slavery, but I want y'all to understand that the Americans, the U.S. in the United States, so-called melanated, black, NBC, whatever you want to call them, those people that were here in the United States, they also used African spirituality to fight against white oppression, okay, and white power. So I just want you guys to understand that, okay? So I appreciate everybody in the building. Peace and love. I will check you on the next.